Merhaba. That's Maltese, I hope, for hello and welcome. Welcome, in fact, to City Breaks Valletta, episode 2. I've got one more piece of Maltese to try, and it goes like this. Yisimni Marion Jones. I'm Marion Jones. And this is the first proper episode, if you will, of the Valletta series, the first one after the introduction, and I'm calling it 3 Walks Around Valletta. My ideas for getting to know Valletta in the first day or two that you're there, broken down into 3 different walks, 2 of which can be joined onto each other, if you prefer, and which between them will take you all over the main parts of this very walkable little city. Walkable certainly as in small in scale, although there are some pretty steep side streets, so if that's not your thing, you might want to avoid them. I've given, I hope, enough detail to be able to follow them all, but take a map with you because I don't mention every single street name. So then, let's go. The first walk is a general tour of all the main sites in the middle of the city, and the following 2 take you round the western and then eastern end of the city, respectively. The first one then will take, I'd say, no more than an hour, unless you stop off, which you're very likely to do. You could certainly spend a morning, afternoon, or even a whole day on it, if you want to pop into some of the places I mention. It takes in pretty much all the major sites of the city, many of which I'll be coming back to in future episodes, so I'm just giving a little bit of detail here. And last admin point, it's pretty much circular. You end up 5 minutes back from where you started. And said starting point, I would suggest, is outside the Auberge de Castile, in Castile Square, sited about halfway through the city from east to west, and overlooking the southern coastline, from where you will get wonderful views over the Grand Harbour towards the 3 cities, perhaps Valletta's most spectacular view of all, with stiff competition. Have a quick look round the square itself, lots of statues of people famous from Maltese history and politics. To give just one example, Dom Mintoff, labelled Prim Ministru, Prime Minister, which he was twice, in the 1950s and again between 1971 and 84. But there's no doubt that the most spectacular thing to see here, apart from the view, is the Auberge de Castile, one of Valletta's 8 auberges, stunning buildings put up originally by the Knights Templar, each one the headquarters for one of their orders. So there was a French one, an English one, a German one, Italian, a couple labelled for areas of France, Auvergne and Provence, and a couple of Spanish ones, Aragon and this one, Castile. They were the grand buildings where the knights lived, several of which still survive today and have been repurposed for various reasons. More of that to follow. OK then, so the Auberge de Castile, a stunning setting on Valletta's highest point, beautiful golden stone building with pillars and steps and a pair of cannon outside, flags of course, the Maltese flag, the EU flag, originally built in the 1570s, but what you're looking at is the Baroque facade added in the 18th century. This building is the Prime Minister's office, so therefore, sadly, not open to the public, but very photogenic anyway, from the outside. So, if you walk from Castile Square towards Merchant Street, you come immediately to another little square, Victory Square, much smaller, but with 2 important sites in it linked to the history of Valletta. Bang in the middle, the statue of the Grand Master Jean de Valletta, after whom the city was named because he founded it, and on one corner the Church of Our Lady of Victory, the first church of Valletta as it's known, built in 1565, just after the knights had seen off the Ottoman invaders and decided that they would make their home in Malta, having proved capable of defending it, and they would found a new capital city right here and call it Valletta, after that Grand Master Jean de Valletta. So the very first thing they did was build this church in thanksgiving for their great victory, and they dedicated it to the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin, which explains why, when you get inside, you will notice that down both sides of the church are huge paintings depicting scenes in the life of Mary. They don't date from the founding of the church, they were done in the 18th century, examples of Maltese Baroque art. Jean de Valletta himself was buried here, before being moved to St. John's Cathedral. In 1837 the church was declared to be the garrison church of the Royal Malta Artillery. So very much a military role, And today the church is the place for remembering the two great victories won in Malta. The original Great Siege, so the victory won by the knights over the Ottoman would-be invaders, and the defeat of the Italian fleet by the Allied forces in 1943. Both events are commemorated every year on September the 8th, which is, by the way, the feast of the Nativity of the Virgin. It is a beautiful little church, definitely worth a look round. It's currently, 2024, undergoing a fairly major restoration project. They're working on the building and the organ and the altar. They've got conservation experts from the Courtauld Institute in London restoring some of the paintings. There's a funding campaign going alongside, and actually that worked very well for us because the day we went, they happened to be having a fundraising concert. And we got the chance to sit in those lovely surroundings and listen to, I think she was an Italian opera singer, running through some arias. Anyway, when you've finished with the church, go down Merchant Street, which leads off from the square and is called in Maltese Tric il Mercanti. It's one of the two main axes of the city, along with Republic Street. And no sooner have you gone down there, on your left you will find another auberge, the Italian one this time, which today is Malta's National Museum of Art, i.e. it's got public access. I'll come back to what's inside it in a later episode, but for the moment I would definitely advise that you pop in to the central courtyard, which you can do before you get to the part where you have to pay to go in, and have a look at the beautiful honey-coloured walls and the central well, and that will all allow you to dream back to the 16th century and picture how it was then. There's even seating inside the courtyard. I think sometimes it's a cafe, although not on the day we went. But either way, if you want to sit there and drink in those lovely surroundings, you can. After that, I have a suggestion for a little detour, if you fancy it, down to St Paul's Shipwreck Church, which you can reach by turning right into St Lucy Street and then left at the bottom into St Paul Street. Along on your left, there it is, the second most opulent church after St John's, as I've seen it described, dedicated to St Paul, a very important figure in Malta, of course, having been shipwrecked off its coast and spent about 3 months there, enough time to convert the Maltese to Christianity. Full story of that coming also in a later episode. But for now, just a quick mention of the glorious interior of that church. Think crimson and gold, statues of the apostles, and, of course, lots of mementos to St Paul, including, I'm afraid, the pillar on which he's said to have been beheaded, and a little gold reliquary with inside, so it is said, a fragment of his wrist bone. If you do that detour, then wend your way back to Merchant Street and carry on, because a little bit further you can turn left into Archbishop Street, left again, and that will bring you into St George's Square, perhaps the biggest, most splendid square in Valletta. The site of the Grand Master's Palace, other imposing buildings around it, a lovely central fountain, and the site where lots of national celebrations take place, and from where parades through the city often start. I'll be coming back to the Grand Master's Palace in episode 3, which will be all about the knights who built it, so for the moment, just a quick idea of what to look out for. Certainly notice the balconies outside, beautiful intricate bottle green balconies, which you'll see in many places in Valletta, but these are said to be the original ones, all the others are copies of them. Hanging centrally on one of the outside walls, the citation from King George when he awarded Malta the George Cross in April 1942, to honour her brave people, as he put it. And next to that, a text on a similar theme from President Roosevelt, which begins, "In the name of the people of the United States of America, I salute the island of Malta." So this building was designed in 1571, just after the Great Siege, at the point at which the knights had decided they would make their home permanently on the island, and so a grand palace was needed for the Grand Master. And it remained the seat of political power right up until 2015, when Malta's new Parliament building was opened. Today, it's the office of the President of Malta, a place where state banquets are held, perhaps conferences, but also open to the public. And there's certainly lots to see, apart from the grand exterior balconies, guarded incidentally by uniformed, I'm not sure if they were police or soldiers, but men in ceremonial dress certainly. There are arched entrances which take you into the imposing courtyard, and once you get inside you'll find 4 corridors around the square, also very much designed to impress. The floor is marble, covered in the coats of arms of various grandmasters from the past, and around the walls paintings of the knights in all their various battles. A whole collection of grand rooms run away from the corridors. The throne room, for example, which was, and I think actually still is, used to host ambassadors and very important visitors. And equally grand, the Grand Council Chamber, where the business was actually done. So, again, gold embossed walls, golden furniture, the flags of Malta and the European Union up at the front, a frieze around the walls with scenes from Maltese history, and a whole lot more staterooms too, which I'm not going to go through in great detail. A state dining room, the page's waiting room, the Prince of Wales corridor, named for Edward, Prince of Wales, in 1862, so Queen Victoria's oldest son, who became Edward VII, and also the Armoury, a comprehensive collection of weapons. Each knight apparently left his property to the order, including swords and whatnot, and all of that was collected and is on display here. It's actually a good place to trace the history of weaponry, if that's an interest of yours, because you can start with the swords and move on past the guns, find the cannons, etc. For me, the highlight was a couple of life-sized horses with knights sitting atop them in all their regalia, chainmail, etc. And I noticed in the rough guide that they were very taken with some of this too, and described their highlight as being, quote, a Damascene suit of body armour that belonged to Grand Master Vigancourt, entirely encrusted in gold and silver fleur-de-lis and military symbols. So that's the Grand Palace. If you fancy another quick detour, then go up Theatre Street from the square to the Manuel Theatre, which is just along on the right-hand side. Built in 1731 by one of the Grand Masters, his aim apparently was to provide, quote, honest entertainment for the knights and the public. This is remembered in an inscription over the door, which reads in Latin, ad honestam populi oblectationem, or something like that. It's Malta's National Theatre, in fact, another building with an absolutely sumptuous inside, again gold, an intricate blue and gold domed ceiling, 4 tiers of golden boxes and balconies. They do guided tours, I think, so you can get inside if you wish, or better still, do what we did and go to a performance. They do lots of things in English. We saw the 39 Steps, which made a lovely opportunity to spend 2 or 3 hours inside, admiring all those wonderful decorations. If you do that detour, then go back to St George's Square with the Grand Palace in it, and carry on down Republic Street, when the first thing you'll encounter is another little square, Republic Square in English, although I noticed that the Maltese version is Piazza Regina, presumably a reference to the Queen whose statue is there, Queen Victoria. There she is, gazing regally down at everybody, a statue erected in 1891 to mark her Golden Jubilee, although, in fact, interestingly, in front of it there is an empty plinth, and that's for a reason. An artist designed it as a sort of Republican symbol to say, what would we have if we didn't have royalty? And just behind those 2 plinths, another imposing building, which is in fact the last building the knights put up themselves in Valletta, dating from 1776, and which today is the public library. So you can go in, which I did briefly, and in my notes I just wrote 2 words to describe it, and they were fusty, dusty. But it was nice to have a look inside. And just opposite the library, possibly of more interest, the Café Jubilee, a reference to Victoria's Jubilee, I assume, a vintage brasserie-style cafe with a most amazing array of cakes and actually lots of outdoor tables. If you continue up Republic Street towards St John's Cathedral, you will pass on the left, on the side of the building really, just where you see the queues of people waiting to get in, a memorial for Daphne Caruana Galizia, a Maltese journalist whose story I will be telling in a later episode, because she certainly shouldn't be forgotten. She was an investigative journalist poking into corruption on Malta, which I'm led to believe is quite a theme and goes in some cases right up to the very highest levels. She was looking into the doings of various politicians, with the result that she was murdered, killed by a car bomb, a story which made headlines all over the world at the time. This was in 2017, and which has refused to go away on Malta itself. The court cases are still ongoing, as I'll be recounting in a later episode. For the moment, I just wanted to mention briefly the memorial to her which has been set up there. Flowers, photographs, candles, a placard reading Justice for Daphne, which is the name of the campaign still going on in a bid to find out the truth and bring the right people to justice, and little cards with quotations from some of the things that she said. This one, for example: "Freedom of expression is precious, and opposition to government essential." As you round the corner, you'll be at the front of St John's Cathedral, nice little square full of cafes and whatnot, and one of Valletta's standout buildings. Here's a description from its own leaflet. St John's Co-Cathedral is a unique monument and a gem of Baroque art. It owes its rich history and artistic heritage to the fact that it was the conventual church of the Order of the Knights of St John. The Grand Masters and Knights donated gifts of high aesthetic value and made enormous contributions to enrich it with the best works of art by the leading artists available to them, including Caravaggio. I think if you read that before you see the cathedral, you'll be a bit surprised when you get outside, because it has a relatively plain stone exterior. But inside, think jewellery box. Highlights include just the overall sumptuousness really, gold, gold and more gold. Walls covered in gilded motifs of foliage and flowers and angels. A vault decorated with paintings showing 18 episodes in the life of St John the Baptist. An unforgettable marble floor, inlaid all over with tombstones for many of the knights, predominantly black and white and red with details picked out in gold. 364 of them apparently, not that I counted, and decorated too with symbols and heraldic devices. Each knight had his own. Often they had a Latin eulogy. Sometimes they asked for a picture of a skull to decorate their tomb. You could spend your visit just looking at the floor, but don't do that. Look up too and notice the gold and blue pillars. Wander down past the 8 side chapels, one for each order of the knights. And absolutely find the oratory, which is the total highlight for anyone with an art-loving mind, because there are 2 original Caravaggio paintings. The largest painting he ever did, the beheading of John the Baptist, right there exactly where he painted it, and a smaller one called St Jerome Writing. There's a little film running on a loop telling you Caravaggio's story, and I'll be coming back to this both in the art episode and in the final anthology episode. So, more anon. Meanwhile, carry on down Republic Street, past the old Opera House, or rather the site of the old Opera House, because here, known in Maltese as Piazza Teatro Real, which means Royal Theatre Square, is the site where the Royal Opera House stood before it was more or less completely destroyed in bombing during World War II. It was a ruin for decades until the artist Renzo Piano was asked to do something with it, and he's designed an open-air theatre in the ruins. So leaving it clear that ruins they were and are, but incorporating an open-air theatre where regular concerts and cinema screenings and outdoor productions are held. Just past that, also on the left, the new Parliament building, dating from 2015. The sign outside will tell you where you are. Parlamenta Malta, it reads. And very proud of it they are too. So, built in local limestone with a honeycomb effect on the outside, said perhaps to be a reference to the bees which are a symbol of Malta. 2 buildings, one the chamber, one the admin block. And just past that, on the right, the city gate, also designed by Renzo Piano. Very modern, quite minimalist, cleverly designed over the moat, which was built to surround the city and protect it, and leading down to the big new Independence Square with its Triton fountains, designed to represent Malta's links with the sea, so 3 bronze tritons holding up a huge basin of water, a sight that you'll see from many spots in the city. And that's really the place I intended to end this walk, where you are only about 5 to 6 minutes walk from Castile Square, where we began it. Or you might decide to add walk 2 straight onto it, because that starts here and explores the little part of Valletta just west of the Triton Fountain and takes in the waterfront and the Upper Baracca Gardens, ending in fact about 2 minutes walk from the Auberge Castile. Okay then, so straight into the second walk, and just past the Triton fountains is an opportunity to explore 3 different memorials and a church, all of which have historical significance. Just past the fountain, you will find the Independence Monument, put up in 1989 to mark the 25th anniversary of Malta's independence. Beautiful bronze statue of a woman with a Maltese flag, striding confidently forward, the bonds that she shed lying beneath her feet. Just past that, you will find the St. Publius Church. St. Publius is a name you'll find in various places over the island. He was one of the very early converts to Christianity, appointed the first bishop of the island by St. Paul. And this church, built or begun anyway in 1733, is dedicated to him. Another one which is very ornate inside, and where you'll see such sights as an altar depicting the shipwreck of St. Paul, which brought him to the island. And as you make your way back towards the monument, if you look to your right, you'll see some strange-looking round stone caps known as the granaries, which are in fact the entrance to a series of underground chambers dug out by the knights. Why? They wanted to be able to store at least 2 years' worth of grain, because then they would be able to survive long enough to see off any would-be invaders. Not far from that, a second memorial, the Commonwealth Air Forces Memorial, a huge high tower with a golden eagle sitting right on top, so quite easy to spot if you're anywhere near it. On it are lists of the pilots from all the Commonwealth countries, 2,300 in fact, by the year in which they died, a memorial unveiled by Queen Elizabeth II in 1954, and still maintained impeccably by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. If you continue in a southerly direction, it won't be long till you come to a main road with a massive roundabout, on which is a monument, the National War Memorial, in fact, put up on this site, which was the place for public executions in earlier centuries. It commemorates all the dead from World War I and World War II through a large stone obelisk and an eternal flame. Then, if you keep going south, you'll come to Valletta waterfront, which is the place where the cruise ships stop. It's built on the old port site where the warehouses were, in fact still are, because they've been converted into a parade of restaurants, so quite a nice place to pop to at lunchtime or one evening if you fancy something different. And do notice when you get there that the warehouses still have the coloured doorways which they always used to have, red, blue, green, yellow, the colours being a signal in less literate times to sailors landing as to what should be stored where. I'm guessing meats in the red one and fish in the blue and perhaps grain in the yellow. And then to complete the walk, make your way along Lascaris Wharf, i.e. following the coast, where after 5 minutes or so on your left you'll find the entry to the lift building, and if you hop in, the lift will take you back up to the Upper Baraka Gardens, which are worth pausing in, not least for the views. This is just next to the Auberge de Castile, i.e. the highest point in Valletta. Gardens created in the 17th century as a retreat for the knights. Somewhere for them to retreat for a few quiet moments, or in fact it turns out to engage in some plotting, and there's a reminder of that in the shape of the arcaded section up at one end, where originally there was a roof, but it was removed by one of the Grand Masters because he discovered that the baddie knights were meeting there to plot against him, and he had the roof removed as a sort of warning. Also there is something called the Saluting Battery, which used to be underground ammunition stores, and which today is a museum. Highlight a World War II anti-aircraft gun, somewhere where you can go on guided tours, watch films telling the story of the war, and at 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock any day, listen to the cannon itself being fired. There are various plaques all around the gardens, for example one to the Royal Engineers Bomb Disposal Unit, another one marking the fact that in 1948 the Malta Conference was held here, when Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin came together. 1989 saw the meeting between Bush and Gorbachev, so another very significant moment of history just before the Berlin Wall fell. And lots of other plaques, many of them quite poignant. For example, this one. In memory of the soldiers, sailors, marines, airmen, coast guardsmen and merchant mariners who fought to preserve Malta's freedom during World War II. It's just a lovely place to sit, benches provided, flower beds, wonderful sea views, and just a minute or two's walk from the centre of Valletta. Walk 3 is completely different because it takes in the eastern end of the island. It's a little coastal path with something of interest at each end. A walk that will take definitely less than an hour unless you stop too long in any of the places. So at one end, St Paul's Anglican Cathedral, whose beautiful 200-metre spire you will almost certainly have spotted from elsewhere on the island. It's quite a Valletta skyline landmark, really, which miraculously was not heavily damaged during the wartime bombing. This church serves as a memorial to all the Army, Navy and Air Force units who served on Malta, and there are oak panels dedicated to each of them all around the sanctuary. Quite a sight. If you walk from there down to the coast, you will pass the Bavarian Auberge, another example of the Knights' architecture. This one was built for Anglo-Bavarian knights. Today it's offices, I think, so you can't go in, but you can peep into the courtyard, another glimpse of grandeur from a previous century. And then just close to it, you should be able to find the entrance to a little footpath which will take you round the promontory. It is slightly tricky to find, but if you arm yourself with a map from the tourist office, you should find it on there marked in green, and hopefully you'll get there. You start off walking along past the huts used by divers who come to Malta in quite great numbers, and gradually you'll realise that you're walking past the back of Fort St Elmo, built by the Knights in 1552 as a preparation for the expected invasion by the Ottomans. It's a star-shaped building which helped them withstand the siege for the first 4 weeks or so of the campaign, but which was then captured. But so important was it deemed that when Valletta was built, they made sure that the fortifications of St Elmo were included inside the city's wall. And today, as well as being somewhere to wander round and get lovely coastal views, it is also the site of the National War Museum, of which more coming in subsequent episodes. But as a summary here, it's got the history of Malta on everything really from the Bronze Age right up to its award of the George Cross in World War II. It is also, by the way, the site where the film Midnight Express was partially filmed. You need to pay to get into the National War Museum, but you can wander around the fort itself for free. And when you finish doing that, you can rejoin the footpath back towards the city centre along a road called Trique Méditerrane, which will take you past the lower Baraka Gardens, also a good place to stop, think flowers, benches, snacks, and an arcade at the end, which allows you to look over towards the Siege Bell Monument. Normally I think you can visit that too, but it was closed for restoration when I was there. It's got a huge bell erected in 1992 by, wait for it, the President of Malta and Queen Elizabeth II to mark the 50th anniversary of the year when the George Cross was awarded to the island of Malta, and built in honour of the 7,000 servicemen and women and civilians who were killed in Malta during World War II. The bell still tolls every day at 12 midday, so a reminder of Valletta's wartime history heard throughout the city every single day. And from the Siege Bell Monument, you're just a few minutes' walk back to Merchant Street and the city centre. And that brings me then to the end of this episode, very much hoping that the walk ideas, whether you actually do them or just listen to them for general information and a way of getting your bearings and getting to know some of the major sites of the city, will have whetted your appetite for visiting Valletta. There's more detail to follow on all the main places I've mentioned, starting in the next episode, episode 3, all about the Knights Templar and their role on the island. So a little bit of history and a list of places where you can still find them today. Some of which I've mentioned already, others which I haven't, but either way a help, I hope, if on your visit to Malta, finding out all about the Knights Templar is one of the things you want to do. So then, back to my Maltese notes, which remind me that the way to say thank you very much is grazie hufna, and where I have noted not one but 2 ways to say goodbye, and since I don't know which one's more appropriate here, I think I'll end with them both. Apparently you can either say adio or you can say saha. Until next time then, goodbye.